Joe Biden has completed 1 year as president of the United States, yet challenges persist for the U.S. president. From the pandemic to the escalating tensions with Russia over Ukraine. Welcome to WION World is One. My name is Priyanka Sharma, and on this weekly broadcast of the WION-VOA co-production, we'll show you a recap of Biden's 1 year in the White House. We'll also discuss the pandemic and what new research tells us about the Omicron variant. Let's start by talking about vaccines. While nearly 9.5 billion doses of COVID shots have been given across the planet, less than 10% of low-income countries have received a single dose. But that's about to change now. VOA's Jessica Stone reports that India will be at the center of the solution. Take a look.
It's called Corbavax, and it's expected to be available beginning in February, courtesy of mega medical manufacturer Biological E Limited, based in southern India. India's health minister announced its emergency approval in December. By then, Dr. Maria Elena Batazzi and Dr. Peter Hortez, co-directors of the Texas Children's Vaccine Center in Houston, Texas, had been working with BioE for nearly 2 years to create the vaccine using existing technology.
What this new vaccine technology brings to the table is the large quantity of production that we can produce, right? You know, we're talking Biological E in India already mentioned they could do 100 million doses a month. It can raise a little bit the confidence of using this type of vaccine because this is a conventional technology.
New Delhi has already ordered 300 million doses. Manufacturers in Indonesia, Bangladesh, and parts of Africa are also in discussions to produce Corbavax. Dr. Elizabeth Mack leads the Pediatric Critical Care Unit at the Medical University of South Carolina.
There haven't been diseases of this proportion that were controlled outside of vaccination efforts. So certainly really excited.
So this is,
Public health officials say immunizing more people with a more effective vaccine is critical to preventing additional variants from developing. Dr. Maria Van Kerkhove of the World Health Organization.
So it is very unlikely that Omicron will be the last variant you'll hear us speaking about. This is why it is so critical that we focus on getting vulnerable populations around the world vaccinated and that we increase vaccination coverage in all countries.
Millions across the developing world have received China's Sinovac or Sinopharm vaccine. Both have proven to be less effective against the Delta variant and Omicron. Dr. Batazzi says Corbavax could provide more long-lasting protection.
I think it can fill that gap because we're already seeing that individuals who participated early in 2020, they are being followed many months later. They still have a very durable immune response.
Still, Corbavax has drawbacks of its own. It can't be modified as quickly as mRNA vaccines, and just like existing vaccines, it will not prevent COVID-19 disease completely or its spread. It also has yet to be approved by the World Health Organization for distribution through the Global Vaccine Initiative, COVAX. But with each step towards more jabs and more arms, public health officials say we will be closer to a world with more immunity against COVID-19, no matter where you live. Jessica Stone, VOA News, Washington.
To speak about this further, we're now joined by Voice of America's correspondent Chris Casquejo from Washington. Chris, thanks for joining us. My first question for you. Advances in research continue to offer promise to help end the pandemic. A new study has found that the Omicron variant of COVID is less severe than the previous ones, even for the unvaccinated. So how would that help in boosting immunity?
Good morning from Washington, D.C. Scientists say that while the Omicron variant evaded vaccines in infected people, well, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a concept called hybrid immunity. Both the vaccinated and unvaccinated showed a higher immune response when they were infected with a variant. The study out of South Africa, where Omicron originated, has yet to be peer-reviewed. Scientists saw about a 25% lowering of the risk of death, meaning a 1.3 times lower risk of death. They found Omicron to be similar in severity to the first wave, but back then, during the first wave, vaccines weren't yet widely available. And they also want to reemphasize that despite these initial findings, getting the virus is no substitute for getting vaccinated. Priyanka?
Right, Chris, thanks for those inputs. Stay with us on this broadcast. We'll come back to you for your inputs on another story. Let's move on now. US President Joe Biden is ending his first year in office with low approval ratings, largely due to an economic recovery dragged down by inflation and a pandemic that is surging. This despite reaching a bipartisan consensus to pass a $1.9 trillion stimulus plan as well as a $1 trillion infrastructure package. Now, VOA's chief White House correspondent Patsy Widakuswara has this recap for you. Take a look.
A $1.9 trillion COVID-19 relief package pushed through by the Biden administration in March has helped American businesses and families weather the financial impact of the pandemic. The package sent $1,400 in stimulus funding to millions of Americans and monthly payments that have proven successful in reducing poverty. But for many, rising inflation has minimized the impact of that assistance.
Due to the COVID, people don't have money. We just starting back to work and stuff like that. This is outrageous with the prices of the gas today.
Consumer prices in December were 7% higher than those of the year-ago period, marking the highest inflation rate in 40 years. Inflation has dampened economic recovery in a year that the administration says has shown the biggest job growth in American history.
Look at the initial unemployment claims. They're on average, they were at 812,000 a year ago. They're now at 210,000. The unemployment rate and obviously job creation the year before the president took office and the last year. As it relates to COVID, if we look to a year ago, only 1% of adults were fully vaccinated. 74% of adults are fully vaccinated now.
A relatively smooth rollout of COVID-19 vaccines has offered protection to more than 200 million Americans and even provided a brief return to normalcy last year. That is until Omicron caused cases and hospitalizations to spike yet again. The pandemic and inflation have been two major factors in President Joe Biden's sinking approval ratings at the end of his first year, around 45% according to Ipsos, a market research firm.
The president campaigned on eradicating COVID and getting the economy and getting America back to normal. And the longer that the pandemic goes on, the more uncertainty Americans have, and frankly, the more frustration they feel about the fact that they're still dealing with the pandemic.
Meanwhile, Biden's legislative agenda is also a mixed bag. He pushed through a $1 trillion infrastructure law with Republican support, the biggest investment in the nation's public works in a generation. But he has yet to pass Build Back Better, his $1.75 trillion social spending and climate change plan, even though it has already been cut in half from its original size. Some analysts say the administration and Democrats need to reset their agenda.
They have to ask themselves, realizing that Republicans are going to have very little interest in playing ball on high salience issues. What are the smaller things that they can work on that might build up over time and kind of change the narrative from, hey, this guy came in and took big swings at the plate and whiffed, to, hey, this guy showed up and he hit a lot of singles.
And despite Biden's promise to heal a divided nation, Americans are still deeply polarized following the Capitol siege by supporters of Donald Trump on January 6, 2021. Polls suggest most Republicans still believe the baseless claim pushed by the former president that the 2020 election was stolen. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News, Washington.
Let's now go back to VOA correspondent Chris Casquejo, who's with us still from Washington. Chris, coming up to the next question that I have for you. U.S. President Joe Biden campaigned hard on ending the pandemic. How do experts rate his response in the first year of his presidency as of now?
They say he's done well because the U.S. leads the way in terms of dollars and the number of vaccine doses donated to the countries that need them the most. But they also note he's fallen short in getting cooperation from wealthy countries in leading a unified campaign to end the pandemic. The World Health Organization has criticized wealthy nations for offering booster doses before many countries have even given out first doses of the vaccines. Epidemiologists in the U.S. say the Biden administration could have done more to combat misinformation and to ensure that emergency funding went to schools for upgraded ventilation systems. They also fault the Biden administration for not providing at-home COVID-19 tests and N95 masks sooner for free or at cost. Now, the president recently announced an insurance-based reimbursement program for N95 masks last week. And beginning next week, the government will start distributing 400 million N95 masks from its strategic stockpile. They'll be available at pharmacies and community health centers across the U.S. Priyanka?
Right, Chris, thanks for those inputs. Let's move on now. We'll come back to you for your inputs on another story. Now, when a Korean-American TV news anchor in the U.S. state of Missouri told the story of a traditional holiday meal of noodles, she received a racist message in response. That message and the anchor's reaction have now sparked a viral conversation about racism against the Asian community in particular in the United States. Take a look at this next VOA report for more details.
A list of what's
at the end of a New Year's Day segment highlighting what Americans traditionally eat on the holiday, KSDK TV anchor Michelle Lee told viewers what her family enjoyed.
I ate dumpling soup. That's what a lot of Korean people do.
Soon after, a viewer left a voicemail and Lee posted a video of herself listening to the minute-long message.
She was being very Asian, and I don't know, she can keep her Korean to herself.
Lee says the caller's words hurt her deeply.
It takes me back to from being a kid, or it takes me back to that one time this happened, or that one time that person said this. So it really, it compounds the scars you've already built through your lifetime.
The video now has more than 3.7 million views. Using the hashtag #VeryAsian, many prominent Asian Americans like Boston Mayor Michelle Wu, U.S. Senator Tammy Duckworth, and actress and comedian Margaret Cho weighed in to support Lee.
I think it's just really important that we look to these issues and that these moments in society go viral, that people see that their ignorance is being watched.
Anti-Asian sentiment is nothing new in the United States. There were legal limits on immigration from China and other countries from the 1880s until 1965. And the U.S. government interned Japanese Americans during World War II.
There's this stereotype that Asians are never quite American enough, are never really American, and in many ways have to get rid of their Asian culture in order to be American, in ways that we don't ask other people, like, say, Europeans, for example.
Other experts say U.S. schools fail to teach the history of discrimination against Asian Americans. Without that background, the current wave of slurs and attacks cannot be seen as part of systemic discrimination.
Let's actually talk about race and racial difference, and what does this mean, and what's the systemic versions of it, and how does this affect how we engage and relate with each other. And then that changes how we have to think about racism beyond being an individual thing, right? But as a structural aspect of our society that is reinforced by cultural norms and representation.
The outpouring of social media support for Lee has helped her move past the hurtful racism of the call.
I think that's something that we are really coming to terms with as a world, because we're all becoming more mixed. We're all becoming more appreciative of who we are. We all are embracing our true self.
And with that, an ugly moment is turning into a social media movement, highlighting America's promise as a multi-ethnic, multiracial society. Chris Casquejo, VOA News, Washington.
Let's now get some more perspective on this story from Voice of America's Chris Casquejo, who is with us still from Washington. Now, Chris, the pandemic has brought a rise in anti-Asian attacks in the United States, and the latest incident was a subway killing in New York City. How many such incidents against Asian Americans have happened, and what have lawmakers done in response? Moreover, just to follow up to that, what can they do moving forward?
More than 10,000 hate incidents had been reported through September of 2021 to Stop AAPI Hate, a group which tracks racially motivated attacks on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. On Saturday, a man shoved 40-year-old Michelle Go onto subway tracks in New York City, where she died when she was hit by an oncoming train. That homeless man now faces a murder charge. But last year, with wide bipartisan support, U.S. lawmakers passed legislation to deal with the rise in anti-Asian hate crimes. That bill gives more money to local law enforcement agencies to improve their investigation, identification, and reporting of bias-driven incidents. And these incidents often go unreported as the victims are afraid to come forward. But individual states are also moving forward. New Jersey passed a law just last week requiring Asian American history to be taught in public schools, making it the second state in the U.S. to have such a requirement. Illinois was the first, and now other states are looking to follow suit. And finally, an update on the anchor Michelle Lee from our story. With an initial donation she received from actress and comedian Ellen DeGeneres on her TV show, Michelle has now started the Very Asian Foundation to amplify Asian American and Pacific Islander voices and perspectives. So she's now also helping with that education effort through this new foundation. Priyanka?
Right, Chris Casquejo, thanks so much for all those inputs, and thanks for joining us from Washington on this special broadcast.